Hey guys, so this is the third installment now in my complete guide to drafting. Today I'm going to talk about deck building, a little bit about deck building, sort of what you need to make a deck perform well, a well-balanced deck kind of thing, and resource curve. And your resource curve is something you need to take into account when picking your cards, also something you need to take into account when building your deck, and it's one of the main reasons to move away from the bread system we talked about last time. So you need resources to play every card in the game, pretty much. I mean, maybe there'll be some exceptions, but every card essentially has a resource cost, and you want to be playing a resource every single turn in the early to mid stages of the game. And with this in mind, your resource curve is essentially how well you've built your deck to take advantage of this fact. You want to be making the most out of your resources every turn, and you want to be playing something impactful every turn. By making the most out of your resources, I mean you want to have cards in your hand, or you want to draw into cards that are efficient to play on every turn. So like a 1-drop on turn 1, a 2-drop on turn 2, a 3-drop on turn 3, and so on, essentially. As a general rule, cards that are costing more also are better. They're more powerful, they're more impactful. So you want to build your deck so that every turn you're making the biggest impact on the game that you can. First off, you generally don't want a high cost curve. Mid-range to low is usually the most effective. You want to get on top of your opponent and ready your board state so that when you play your high-end cards, your bomb cards, maybe they've used up their removal already, or they've just taken so much damage that they can't deal with it. When drafting, you're pretty much never going to get a perfect curve. Hex is a different game to other games because of the threshold requirements you have, and you need to take this into account as well. When picking cards, like when you're in the draft, when you're picking cards, if there are two cards that are, more or less the same power, or you want them both equally, it's usually better just to take the one with the lower cost, just because, obviously it's going to come out earlier in the game, it's going to have more of an impact, it's going to be in the game for longer. So if you have a 2-2 for 2 and a 2-2 for 3, obviously the 2-2 for 2 is better. That's a very, very simple example, but a more complicated example is threshold requirements, and that's if you take a look at Scarl Griffin here, he's a 4-cost, 2 threshold, 2/4 with flight, which is pretty good. He's in set 1. He's pretty much a staple card for Diamond, and he's pretty good at what he does. And this card here is Mystic of the Tranquil Dream. It's a 4-cost 2/4 as a single threshold, and it has a socket. And when you're building like Diamond Sapphire, for example, this card's pretty much always going to have the flight gem. So for now, we're going to ignore that he has a socket and he's just straight up more powerful than the other card anyway. And we'll just say that these two guys are a 4-cost 2/4 flyer, and this guy is a 4-cost 2/4 flyer. The difference between these two cards is that this guy has a double threshold, which means he's a little bit harder to play because you need 2 diamond out in order to play this guy. And this guy's a single threshold, which means you only need a single sapphire in order to play this guy. So, in a vacuum, these two are 2/4 flyers for 4. Which one would you pick if you're in Sapphire Diamond? I'd probably take the Mystic because it has a lower threshold cost, it's easier to cast, it's easier to get into the game, and it has less of an impact on your resource or threshold requirements. So, just remember, if you want 2 cards equally, or they're equal power, it's usually better to go for the one that has a lower cost overall. Obviously, I said generally cards with a higher cost are better, they have more power, but if the cards are equal in power, you can see that, or you just want them equally, the one with the lower cost is going to have more of an impact in the game, so you probably want to be picking that one. The reason for having an early game, and by early game I mean you have cards to play in the early game, the reason that's important is that a well-curved deck will usually put you in a really bad spot before you can do anything if your curve is too high. If you have a high curve and you don't have much of an early game, like say if you have a bunch of 5-cost cards, deck putting out cards on turns 1, 2, 3 and 4 will probably have you dead or near death before you can ever cast that 5-cost card. So, you cast your 5-cost card, they've put a card out every turn up until that point, you're probably on like 5 or 6 life, and they can just swing around that troop and finish you off, and you're pretty much done at that point. It's usually not going to be enough, like unless it's, an Eternal Guardian on turn 8 or something. It's probably not going to be enough to win you the game at that point. On the flip side, if you have a bunch of 1 and 2 drop cards and not many 3, 4 or 5 cost cards, someone who's playing cards on 1, turn 1, 2, and 3 efficiently. By the time they play their 3-drop, they're probably going to, you know, pretty much make all of your 1 and 2 drops irrelevant. They're just going to be able to block you out, and then they play a 4-drop as well, and then that's going to be able to attack in, and they're going to hold back the 3-drop in order to block you. It's just not balanced, and you don't have effective plays on each turn, and that goes the same for very, very, very low curves and very, very, very high curves. As I say, ideally you want to be around the mid-range, which is the 3 and 4 spot. That's where you want the most of your cards to be. That's where the meat of your deck is, and that's where a lot of the setting up for the late game comes into play. The second part of this video is really about putting together a viable limited deck. The first thing you need to really think about is that limited is a very, very troop heavy format, and you don't really want to be running less than 13 troops in a normal limited deck. There are archetypes that, you know, maybe will just throw that theory out the water, but you know, when you're just picking troops, you're not going for an archetype, you're just trying to build a solid deck. Generally you don't want less than 13 troops, and honestly I would say 15 to 16 is a more reasonable amount. Attacking and defending is how limited works. It's about playing threats and answering threats, and generally whoever has the most unanswered threats will win the game. So if I'm playing a bunch of threats, my opponent can't deal with them, they can't block them effectively, they don't have the removal to deal with them, then generally I'm going to win the game. So it's about playing threats and answering your opponent's threats, and whoever does that the most efficiently is usually going to win the game. So this is another good reason to move away from bread. If you're in pack 3, you have 8 troops and you see a removal spell or something, you might not want to take it because you've only got 8 troops. If you have a 3-cost troop in there, like Glimmergen Witch or something, or maybe even like a Boulder Brute or a Mystic of the Tranquil Dream again, if there's a removal there and you've only got 8 troops, you might want to take one of those guys because, you know, you've got 8 troops and you need to win the game, and to win the game you need to have unanswered threats. If you've only got 8 troops, there's a high chance that all of your threats are going to be answered by your opponent who's running 13 troops and removal. So you know, you may be able to remove a bunch of your opponent's threats, but ultimately if all of your cards go, you lose all of those 8 troops, you're not going to be able to win the game. So you need a good amount of troops, and I would say troops are probably the most important thing in limited. You know, archetypes again can move away from this and they can do their own thing, but generally when you're just building a normal balanced deck, you want about 13 to 16 troops. Sometimes you can even go more than that, and the same is true for the opposite. You know, if you're on 17 troops and you open up a pack and it has like a really, 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 really good troop, like maybe even like an evasive or efficient troop, and you see a removal that maybe isn't so good or a spell that isn't so good, you may just want to take the spell because you already have 17 troops, you know, unless that troop is like sufficiently better than the troops you already have, or it fits into your curve really well. You're probably not going to want to take that troop because you already had enough. You want to start building up the support for your deck. So when you're actually putting your deck together, it's important to have a good curve, a good balance of cards so that your final deck will do all of the things it needs to do. So it needs to have troops, it needs to have removal, and it needs to have them in good ratios as well. So you want mostly troops, a good helping of removal, and the last few cards can just be sort of the best of what you have left. Another thing that can be important in building a balanced deck is threshold fixing. Right now we just have Shards of Fate, which is this card. It gives you any color threshold that your deck can currently provide, and the same with Adaptable Infusion Device. The difference between these two is this thing's a land. By land I mean resource, of course. It's a resource, and it doesn't give you a resource the turn it comes into play, but it gives you a permanent resource which you'll get the turn after. This isn't so important in set 1. The main reasons in set 1 I would say you'd want to take resource fixing is if you have very, very high double thresholds throughout your deck. Normally for me I would probably go like double color, and you know, one color would be very, very high in double thresholds. I'd try and keep the double thresholds restricted to one color, and then my secondary color I would, like, you know, perhaps not have so many double thresholds, maybe 2 or 3, and make sure they're higher cost so that, you know, they come into play later, and by the time I want to play them, I'm probably going to have that second threshold I need. But if you just got bad picks, bad luck, you had a bunch of good cards that were just all double threshold, and you got some resource fixing as well, you probably want to take these resource fixers for that kind of deck, or even a tricolor deck, or a deck where you're splashing into a third color. Again, not so relevant in set 1, but it probably will be further down the line. Resource fixing is something you probably want to consider for a balanced deck, especially if you're very high on thresholds, or in 3 colors. So the easiest thing to do when building your deck is take the best cards out. You want to sort by cost first of all. This is how I do it. I sort by cost. I go through all of the cards one by one and take the best cards, the cards that I was excited about when I drafted them. That's your removal, your evasion troops, your bombs, all the cards that are good cards, and the reason you pick them is because you want to play them in your deck. You take out all the good cards, and then once you've done that, you can sort of see where your curve is. You can also see what kind of card you're missing. So say you bring out a deck and you're only 8 troops once you put all the good cards in, so you're going to want to at least get up to that 13 troop level, and you can see that you're very, very heavy in the 4-drop spot, and you want to get maybe some more 2 and 3 drops in there. So with that in mind, once you've taken all the good cards out of your pool, with what you have left, you can work around your curve and what your deck needs. So you can say, I need troops, I need 3 drops, I need 2 drops, and put those in. And once you've done that, once you've sort of got a stable curve, the last 2 or 3 cards of your deck, they can be sort of the best cards of what you have left. They don't necessarily need to fit into your curve if you already have a decent curve. They don't necessarily need to be troops if you already have 13 troops. Just look at the best of what you have left and put that in. That's generally a good way to build your deck. A stable curve usually looks like a couple of 1-drops, a few more 2-drops than 1-drops. The meat of your deck will be in your 3-drops. You'll probably have fewer 4-drops than 3-drops, but that's usually a spot in your deck where you have quite a lot of cards as well. And then less 5-drops than 4-drops, and less 6-drops than 5-drops. So if you stack them all out and you had them all in piles, then the highest point would be 3, and it would go down either side with the amount of cards you have in each number of resource cost reducing. So yeah, after this lesson I'm going to be actually posting another video. It's going to be me going through the deck building process in a draft. I'll explain what I'm doing. You'll maybe see a little bit more of what I'm talking about. You'll be able to find that video just below here, and also the next lesson, which is going to be about signaling in draft. And signaling is a concept where you're reading what colors are open by the cards you see. So you sort of know what colours you're going to go into, and you're sending signals about what colours you're in so people don't pick those colours. But yeah, you'll be able to find the next lesson again down here. If you want to subscribe and see when my videos get posted, and just generally support me, then you can find the subscribe button over here, and there's also a link to my live stream below the video in the description. So if you want to watch me play live, you want to ask me some questions, feel free to do that. There's also a bunch of links to other streamers below my stream, so if you want to follow those guys as well, then that'd be good. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.